Good afternoon. As it is 2 p.m., I will call the City Council workshop of August 25th, 2021 to order. I am presiding today as Mayor Pro Tem in Mayor Severance's absence. Due to COVID-19, this will be both a physical meeting location and a virtual meeting per Washington Proclamation 20-28. Due to Governor Inslee's most recent order, masks are required for everyone in council chambers, regardless of vaccination status. City staff are participating via telecom. Today's meeting may be viewed live on YouTube. Guests that are included in staff presentations will be excused from the Ring Central meeting at the conclusion of the agenda item as appropriate. As we have no action items to today's agenda, I will not call roll. Up first is Ray Lindbergh on Development Services Central Business District Zoning Code Revision. Ray, are you set to go?
I am all set. Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I'm going to do a pretty brief presentation here. We've been before the Planning Commission with this, and we're just kind of briefing everybody right now with the intent of coming back with a revised code in the next couple months here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen, go through a quick presentation, and then answer any questions if you have any. Okay, sorry, I'm on the wrong screen here. Just a moment. Okay, there we go. Can you see that presentation?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good deal. Okay, what we have today, like I said, is the Central Business District Code Amendment, and we went through this process a while back with regard to uses and standards that are found within the Central Business District. And so now I've lost my other screen. I'm sorry, this is not going well for me right now. There we go. So we had the process by which we went through this. We did a simplified and clarified code amendment to the Central Business District regulations. That effort was triggered by project proposals and some court decisions and kind of just a general sense that we needed to fix some things in the CBD district. And those changes were proposed, and we went through the whole process last year, 2020, and they were approved by the City Council on January 5th of 2021. And after a while of going through that, we realized that we needed to make some further changes. Now, the changes that we made originally included some clarity issues. There was some terminology and wording in the text that was leading to interpretations that weren't working out the way we intended. There were some community desire issues, what was wanted in the Central Business District. We had some, again, clarification of principal versus accessory permitted uses. And then we had some dimensional standards that we'd added into the code with regard to creation of new lots and lot line adjustments. And what happened is, like I said, after a period of time, we realized that some of those changes had not gone through how we had intended. The code that was approved did keep the intent of the changes that we had to streamline things and to get the will of the community as far as what people wanted to see in the downtown area. The key points that were of concern were adjusted, and those went through the adopted code language. But like I said, minor changes didn't make the final draft through a staff error, and so we're going back right now and fixing that essentially. All the presentations in the City Council showed that intended version of the code, but for some reason, we gave you essentially the wrong version, an older version that had some minor changes that hadn't been made. So what we're proposing to do here is take the approved code that is currently in effect and make some minor changes to it. And those two copies of code are available in your packet today. We have what's approved right now, and then we have what was intended. And the example I'm showing on the screen is from 1923-15. and it takes a sentence that says the following principal uses and their accessory uses may be permitted in a central business district when authorized by the hearing examiner. And what was intended was the following uses may be permitted in a central business district when authorized by the hearing examiner. And so these are really minor changes. They don't have a significant effect on, what's happening in the CBD. We just want to make sure that the changes that we had intended and that we presented to you were actually in effect. And so we're going back with a mea culpa here. Please forgive me, I messed up. So what we're going to do is make some of those minor changes. You see them in the packet. I don't anticipate that there's going to be anything further. This is just to correct some of those minor changes that we had from that original presentation to the final January 5th approval. And so what we're going to do is make a formal presentation of the revised code as it will appear to the Planning Commission in the future, ask for their positive recommendation and send it to you. And like I said, those changes are available in your packet, and I am available to answer any questions right now if you have any.
Are there any questions of Mr. Lindberg? I'm not seeing any hands. Do you see any hands, Lisa?
No, Mayor Pro Tem, I don't see any hands raised.
I have one quick question. On page 13 in our packet, under the intended, Ray, it
Yes.
talks about non-residential development. Building heights greater than 45 feet shall provide a minimum of 450 square feet of pedestrian-oriented space as defined in the Oak Harbor Design Guidelines. So this is, non-residential would be commercial, correct?
Correct, or mixed use.
All right, but I thought way back when, like 07, 06, 07, that the Planning Commission and then the council approved at that time that they used to take the square lot or the footage of the lot from the four corners and take them to the middle, and then they determine the height from that, but now we're not doing that anymore. But it could go up downtown as high as 55 feet.
That is correct. And what this is saying, if you're going over 45 and up to 55, then you need to provide that pedestrian-oriented space. So you can still go over the 45. That's just saying when you do go over 45, you have to provide that space.
Okay, thank you. That, you read it and read it and read it, and then you go, wait a minute, I'm not sure. So thank you.
Yeah, I understand that completely.
Anybody else change their mind and have a question? All right, Ray, if that's it, we'll move on to item B. Griswold annexation. Thank you very much. Griswold annexation request, and we also have Ashley Paul here in the audience today who is representing Griswold Construction?
Triple C Construction.
Oh, Triple C Construction. All right. And we have David Kuhl presenting this.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem, members of council. Can you see the screen?
I see you.
Can't see it?
No,
How about now?
Not yet.
Huh.
Oh, now I see me.
David, I can screen share for you.
Okay, thank you. So this particular item is an annexation request requested by the Gisvold family. It's on 7.62 acres of property on Goldie Road. Next slide. This is a air photo with a map of the area. Shows 100% ownership by the Gisvold family. The land would be zoned industrial in terms of the city's zoning classification. This particular piece of property is located just north of the Veterans and Foreign Wars building. And then to the north is a Mobius Loop industrial complex. That particular complex has some water service by the city. And if you look out to the west, there's the Mallard family property out on Oak Harbor Road. So that should give you a good perspective of where this is located. Next slide. In annexations, under state law, what happens is you have the ability to say yes and accept an area as proposed, or you can geographically modify it as an area. You also have the option of whether or not to require adoption of the zoning with the annexation and to share the city's indebtedness. You also have the option of saying no, you don't care to initiate any annexation at this time, and there is no right to appeal that decision. Next slide. Accepting the annexation in general would require an increase in service demands, things such as fire and police service. It would also increase the transportation impacts on the roads. As far as property-specific issues, there would be infrastructure connections, an access connection, and the property would be required to put in frontage improvements. Next slide. Adopting the ordinance, back in 2016, there was a general land use comp plan amendment, and this was all classified as industrial. As a specific zone, they'd be classified as industrial. Next slide. The indebtedness portion we talked about earlier, that refers to the existing and future bonds that the city holds. So a person annexing to the city would be required to assume their share of city taxpayer debt. Next slide. So the action that we will talk about next time in September is to conduct a meeting with the applicant and accept the annexation request as is or modify the area. At that point, then we'd go out and we would start, if you decided to go forward, if you wanted to include area, we would go out and start contacting property owners to gauge their interest and see if there's water service in those areas. Or you would just initiate the annexation as requested, and we would go forward with just the Gisvold property. And so the way this works is obviously we just talk about it at work session briefly, and then we move on to the actual hearing, which will be done on September 7th. So I'm available for any questions you may have.
Does council have any questions at this time?
Mayor Pro Tem, could I make a comment?
Yes, sir.
Police Chief. So I didn't see how many acres this was, David. I was wondering what the acreage is on this.
7.62 acres.
Okay, yeah, and I didn't pay attention or didn't catch what the use of the property was going to be. I just want to point out that we have several multi-acre properties that are wooded already within the city. I don't know if this just becomes another one or if it's going to be developed. I just want to make sure that council was aware of that.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Apparently there's someone here. We don't obviously take testimony during a work session, but someone's here from a construction company who is particularly interested in this. So perhaps development actually is contemplated.
I believe we can take a statement. If you want to come up to the microphone, please.
So it's going to be, oh, yeah, of course. My name is Ashley Paul, and I work for Mr. Gisvold as his office manager for Triple C Construction Services. My knowledge of the property is that it's going to be used for storage units. Also, our office for the construction business will also be there. And we have plot plans and site plans as well.
I'll ask a quick question. Do you know if you have any sudden encampments that you have found in looking over the land before the construction starts?
I am not aware.
All right, thank you.
Of course.
Chief Dresser, does that help?
Mayor Pro Tem.
Yes, Councilman Wiesner.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Mr. Cool, has there been any feelers put out to the two properties to the south as to their interest in annexing? I'm always concerned. I realize this is contiguous as it connects, across the street, but obviously we're kind of creating this pocket of non-city property where we're going to have city property, then a couple of non-city properties, and then a city property as you go down the road there on the west side of Goldie Road. Has there been any discussion with those two neighboring property owners regarding their interest?
Thank you, Councilman Wiesner. Typically, the way this works is we just initiate it up front to see your level of interest in even annexing at all. And then at the next meeting, if you do express an interest, then we go out and start contacting people. So we have not contacted anyone regarding this annexation at this time.
Thanks for that. And I'm going to echo Chief Dresker's concern, right? Does this just become another wooded piece of property? At the same time, we know Goldie Road has been an area that it's the city's intention to see develop out into industrial. We've provided some services out there on that road and extended those services recently, which we're hoping obviously will stimulate economic development in that area. So I certainly wouldn't want to hold up a project moving forward that is going to create economic development, because that wouldn't make any sense, as this is an area that we have seen in the past as an incubator, right? But I also know what happens when we end up with, development around pockets and then a large non-development area within that pocket, and those areas become really, really hard to maintain and really hard to deal with, and obviously create issues both for fire and police and as well as the property owners themselves later on. So I'd certainly, I guess, say that my interest is seeing economic development out there. That makes sense. That's, I think, what we've always talked about, and we've always envisioned that as industrial space, storage units, light industrial, manufacturing jobs, that type of stuff created out in that way. So hopefully some of that, it sounds like maybe in that storage unit mix, sounds like they're going to have an office out there and et cetera, and maybe they're going to create some additional spaces. So I have interest maybe in seeing this move forward, but I have concerns about creating a pocket. So that's my 2 cents. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilman Wiesner. Anybody else? Councilman Bossinger.
Yes, I too certainly would agree with continuing the process and putting feelers out to the surrounding properties. Like Councilmember Wiesner said, I think this is perfect for what we would like to see out on Goldie Road. So I certainly support moving forward in the steps for the process. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Bossinger. Anyone else? All right, let's move on to C, and I believe that's Mr. Cool again. Current developments and model home code updates.
Okay, thank you for that. Put this into a slideshow. This is going to be a little development services rundown on the projects that we're working on in current planning, and then we'll also talk a little bit about model homes. As an update, one of the things we're working on currently is a lot of different subdivisions and a lot of different apartment buildings, single-family houses, all kinds of activity in that regard. We also have model homes that are started, and so we'll cover that in a little more detail. Something I'd like to cover quickly with you is in the activity report you get every month, the city administrator's report. If you look at the very end of the document, usually we're kind of towards the end, and on page 198 through 201 is where you'll have all the department updated every month in a Excel spreadsheet. And it has detail about projects that have been around a while, as well as new projects. So I would encourage you to take a look at that if you'd like a snapshot of update of what's happening. It also includes land use on one spreadsheet, and then another spreadsheet has building statistics, things with revenue in the last month, building permit numbers, locations of buildings, that sort of information. So that's always available to you every month. That comes out in the city administrator's report. What I thought I'd do today is go into a little more detail beyond that report. And Councilman Wiesner asked for some specific projects in a meeting last time. So I'll touch on that. Currently, Marin Woods, which you all probably know of, it's on Swan Town Road and has been in the process for a long, long time, has actually started their infrastructure work. So they have civil approval, and they're putting in utilities and other infrastructure right now. That particular project has 46 home sites in it. We have not received a building permit application, so no homes have been processed yet. So we're still waiting for the developer to do that. Howard's Point in Bullet 2, that's a model home project that's come through already. It was one of the first ones to take advantage of our model home code. And most of the homes are currently under construction. There's a total of 19 homes. The models are being used as model homes now. I did have a chance to go out and look at one of them about a month ago. And I think they probably just started showing the model home at that time. Gary Oaks under bullet number 3, that's on SR 20. You all know exactly where that is. That one's been purchased by D.R. Horton. D.R. Horton, if you're not familiar with them, they are one of the largest builders in the country. And so there's a lot of horsepower there that's come into this project. They're currently looking at the reviews that have been done before regarding stormwater and all the previous work that's been done, and they're trying to move that one forward. And that's 135 homes. Scenic Heights, that has 2 models that are ready for permits. The applications are in, the building plans have been reviewed and approved. And so all that needs to happen is the 2 bonds and the fee need to be paid for. And that one, of course, as you know, has 11 total homes on the site that are planned. The Hillside PRD, that's has civil approval, which is engineering approval. And so the infrastructure is available to be started. The staff is currently working on a development agreement with the developer. And we have a meeting internally on the 8th to talk about it and meet with our engineers and the attorneys. And then once we get our agreement ready, a couple days later, we'll send that to the developer. And then we have a meeting planned with the developer on the 14th of September to review that development agreement with them. So that one's 192 lots, 70 homes in phase 1. And we anticipate that one should be moving forward here soon. I'll talk a little bit about model homes. That's been a concern of council for a while. And so I'll cover a little bit of the history of where we were before, as well as where we are today, so you can evaluate it. If you remember the old code in bullet 1, it said all areas of the subdivision serving the model homes have installed frontage improvements as required by the preliminary plat approval. And said improvements shall meet ADA requirements. That, of course, was what was in the code before. It also, in the past, required water and sewer to be installed to each proposed lot for a model home. So that was much more restrictive than what code it is today. Under bullet 3, all proposed streets serving the model homes are adequately marked with street signs to the satisfaction of the public works and fire departments. So that would mean all the streets are done and finished. And that's one section of code that we've changed. Also, under the old code, it required the submittal of financial securities, 150% of the contractor's cost estimate approved by the city, necessary to restore the site to conditions existing prior to the construction of the model homes and all associated structures and improvements. So what that said back then was you put up a bond and then the house can be torn down if the economy goes bad. The new code is a little bit different. And so that last paragraph we just read, we had modified this back in March through a public hearing. It says, in the event of any of the following occurrences, the applicant consents to the city filing a lien against the property in an amount to recover the cost of demolition or completion of the model home in the city's discretion. So what this meant was it gives you options. You could either tear a home down, let's say part of the infrastructure's in, you have a couple model homes that are half finished, the developer fails, goes through health consequences, anything happens, the economy goes bad, and it looks like a long-term duration. You have choices. You could either finish the house, you could do nothing, just leave it there, or you could tear it down. And so those are the options you've been given in this new code as opposed to just the option of tearing it down in the old code. Now, the reasons you could do that is if the preliminary plat expired, or if the subdivision was denied, perhaps, or if the approval period for the model homes expires. So the new code gives you more options than you had before. Also in the new code, it allows the construction of streets, water, sewer, and stormwater at the same time model homes are built. So this is a slide that you saw before, back in March, where we liberalized the ability for developers to come in, install the model homes at the same time the infrastructure is being built. It's a fairly open way to do this, and as long as it's all completed by the time you're ready for a final plat, that works. This approach will allow more speed by allowing the model homes to be built at the same time as the infrastructure. Also, in the new code, this is something we looked at back in March. You might remember where we talked about the need for a charged fire hydrant prior to framing, rather than at the beginning of construction of the model home. So what the development community asked for back then was they could have concrete and be doing other kinds of work, putting in utilities, and not have all the fire system set up. But at the point that they put in lumber, start doing framing, and at that point, they'd have to have a charged fire hydrant. In addition, the fire chief or their designee would sign off on not only the fire hydrant, but also an access road to the model homes. As you know, in our new code, you're not going to be required to put in finished streets until you're ready for the final plat. So the fire chief would be able to make sure that there's a way for an aid car to get to the house in case someone working at the site fell and hurt themselves, and they'd have a way to get in and out of there. So also that we talked about in March was the requirement for performance bonds, restrictive covenants, and hold harmless agreements. And those are all the agreements that the attorneys have put in place with us for the Howard's Point project. So as I was mentioning earlier, there's one development that has done model homes, and that's Howard's Point. It worked out well for them. They came along using the old code, and then at that point we had to figure out, well, what are we going to do with this? So that's when we worked with the attorneys, and we put together the hold harmless agreements, the liens, the covenants, all those documents. So it was all set up. Howard's Point signed the agreements, put up the bonds, and built their 4 model homes. And they did all that. By the time they had the final plat, they were ready to go. And now they're currently building the rest of the homes on the site. So that's gone well. The bonds have been released and they're moving forward. So I'm available for questions and comments and anything I said today or anything else. There was one thing I wanted to mention. We have some other things we'd like to brief you on in the future that we didn't have time for today. One is an overview of our GIS system, and that's where I'll probably bring in Craig Taylor and that group from the Public Works Department to help give you an overview of where we are with our GIS system. Signs is something we've worked on for a while now, electronic reader boards, and a simplification of the sign code. So I've done a draft of that and I've shared that with staff. And we'll get that back in front of you. Perhaps we'll be talking about that in September. Also on the agenda currently is broadband. That's on the agenda in September, scheduled for the 22nd. And as you know, legislatively, the Planning Commission reviews long-range planning projects, and then they come before you. The one you saw today with Mr. Lindenberg, Central Business District, will be moving forward to the Planning Commission and then on to you. Other code changes as well. So I appreciate your time and I'm available for any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cole. Anybody from council have questions, please? Jim, no question? Wiesner?
Mayor Pro Tempore.
Yes, Mr. Savadius, go ahead.
Sorry. Didn't know if you could see the hand up there or not. Mr. Cool, thank you for the update. In depth, but still concise. Appreciate it. You just mentioned broadband. Can you give us a little more of a hint as to that? Where are we at? I don't know if this is your purview or not, but the broadband, the fiber, the wet fiber stuff at the city of Anacortes. It's been a while, it seems like, since we've heard an update on that. And I don't know if that's what you meant by broadband or not.
Yes, sir, it is. Dennis Lefevre and I are working on that. We've been talking about hiring a consultant possibly to help us with that understanding, or perhaps using the work that's been previously done at the county level in the Port of Skagit. So we are continuing to review that and explore options, and we think we'll have a better update for you in a month.
Do we have everything we need signed with the city of Anacortes and or permits to get it to this side of the bridge? That's where I last remember it being left at, was getting it to the Rock Bridge intertie.
I'm not familiar with that aspect of what's happening with broadband.
David, I can take it from there. David's helping me with some of the internal things and the planning aspect, and he's been working with the county because they have some initiatives and we want to tie together with them. They had the initial study, and I think you went to one of the meetings, Councilmember Servadia. So that report came up, and then they're following through with some additional studies and looking at grants. And so we certainly want to dovetail with them. So if we come from the bridge to Oak Harbor, we're going through a lot of area of the county. Regarding the wet fiber, Anacortes is still working on. I think they're getting close to getting the permits done, and it's a matter of their priority when it goes in. And I just talked to staff the other day on that, and so my guess is it's probably being held up because of a lot of the construction that's going on the bridge, and that's making it more difficult. And they're going to have to do another tie-in because they can't. The bridge goes and does some 45-degree turns, so they'll have to put a where they come out of the ground and back in again at the pass island. So that's kind of slowing it down, but certainly staff's ready to proceed on it, and it's really up to Anacortes to proceed. But certainly we have the agreement approved and everything's in place, and so it's a matter of priority. But to really be benefit for the city, we really need the additional connection. So it's really for their benefit in that phase with Anacortes, and that's why they're doing it at their expense. And part of the overall study and bringing on a consultant that David's talking about is to give us the expertise and provide options and report to the council. So we're looking at that, whether we need to do it independently or whether we can dovetail with the county is what we're currently evaluating, and David's doing a good job of working with Dennis Lefevre and doing communication with them, and also some outreach with Skagit Port Authority. Is leading the study on the county side, and they have a lot of expertise. So David and Dennis have been networking with them.
Thank you. So let me ask the question one more time, just to be clear. Is the city of Anacortes waiting on the city of Oak Harbor for anything? Or are we waiting permits or anything that we need to handle? Or are we waiting entirely on the city of Anacortes?
I'm not 100% sure whether the permits were done. We've been putting in the permits and cooperating with DOT and answering the questions. So really the holdup is either on DOT, on WashDOT, or Anacortes. So, and I don't know.
How could we find that out? That's been since the beginning of 2021.
I'll throw it out to Brett if he's on, if he has some more information on that. I think Brett's here today. And I don't think I have any water staff.
Yeah, I'm here. Yes, we have applied for the permits and they're in process. We did apply for them for the city of Anacortes. I haven't heard if they've been issued, but I don't think so. I think we're still in process with them. State is running a little slow on permits for the right-of-way stuff in Highway 20.
Yeah, we'd be happy to make a note to send you an email on the status.
Well, please send it to all of council, but it sounds like they're waiting on.
Yeah.
Anacortes, it sounds like, is waiting on permits that we've applied for with DOT. But
yeah,
I mean, I think we talked about. I mean, if it's DOT, it's DOT. But we talked about that last fall, early this year. So that's been quite some time. Just want to make sure the ball's not dropped on our end.
No, it's not. I mean, he's been asking a lot of questions on it, and staff has been very responsive to the DOT. I think there's been some staff change on WashDOT's part that's been slowing it down, but certainly we will make a note to provide council an update.
Thank you.
Yeah, it got more complicated as we had some issues, and some of it was also on Anacortes trying to change their mind on a couple of things that required more permitting.
Okay, super. Thank you.
Mr. Wiesner?
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem, and thank you, Mr. Cool, for that concise presentation. And yeah, I do appreciate seeing those updates and those permit reports. I certainly do look at those each and every month. Obviously, having the initial detail as to understanding the timing of these and how they're going to flow is important. Sounds like, or at least what I'm seeing is Marin Woods might be our next, between that and the Scenic Heights development. Sounds like those are our next two that we're actually going to probably see some framing going up, and then the hillside shortly after that, and then DR Horton. That's some pretty exciting stuff. It sounds like almost a little over 400 homes that we've got in our future, which is probably I think one of the largest loads we've ever probably carried at any one given time. So great job to you and your department and getting those moved forward. Obviously, we want to look at it from that perspective, like I say, including timing, and sometimes we don't get the timing through some of those reports. So appreciate that update, and I'm glad to hear that the model home ordinance is working. I certainly understand the performance bond. What I want to make sure is we're making those bonds as easy and straightforward as possible. I know sometimes during projects we can have multiple bonds. We've got planting bonds and we've got other completion bonds. So hopefully we're bundling those to make it as palatable for the developers as possible while protecting the city, which is obviously paramount. Obviously, the fact that it worked for Howard's Point, I'm happy that you guys were able to get that up and running for them. That's showing that there's a path there, and obviously they were able to hit the ground running and have gotten those houses up fairly quickly. So appreciate that, and always feel free to keep us informed. There's never too much information. You get workforce housing has been an issue, in the community for quite some time, and sounds like we may be seeing a little bit of relief ahead. And I mean, 400 homes is a pretty big number for the city. And hopefully everybody out there, those people who are watching, do understand it is the city's obligation to take this density. That's what the Growth Management Act says. And this is where the density has to take place in towns like Oak Harbor and Langley, and areas that are allowed to create these denser developments. And without communities like ours accepting some of this density, there's not a real way to, solve much of the problems we have involving workforce housing on the island, because our hands are somewhat tied through the Growth Management Act and the density that's allowed out in the county. So certainly great job on your end of your staff getting this stuff moving forward. And like I say, don't ever feel afraid to hit us with regular updates on these. It's some exciting times. Thanks much.
Thank you, Mr. Wiesner. Any other questions from council? I still see Mr. Wiesner's hand up. Nope, it's down now. Anybody else with a hand? I'm trying to scroll, but it's not. All right, we'll move on to finance then. David Goldman, please.
All right, let's share the screen. All right, this is an update of the American Rescue Plan Act funding, specifically the council subcommittee that has been meeting over the past month or so. So just to remind everybody, the city will receive a total of about $6.6 million in American Rescue Plan Act or ARPA funding. The funds must be obligated by the end of the year in 2024 and expended by the end of 2026. On July 13th, the City Council created an ARPA subcommittee consisting of 3 council members and relevant city staff. The subcommittee has met twice so far. A list of projects and initiatives was evaluated. The list is rather long, so we broke it down into more manageable and logical subsets, which were included in the package. The figures that were listed on the project and initiative lists are a mix between rough estimates and more precise estimates. Where we're really looking for council direction on whether to pursue the ideas, so then we can kind of take a much closer look at some of those projects and initiatives. Departments were asked to prioritize the various items that they submitted, but of course it'll be up to the City Council to provide the final overall priorities. And the direction from the council subcommittee to staff was to provide evaluation criteria to help better understand where the different projects and initiatives stand. So the 8 evaluation categories that were chosen were first, CIP and budget priority. Since the capital plan, CIP, and biennial budget was created with extensive input over a period of time, the thought was that if a project, initiative, or an expense was included in them, it reflected the City Council's vision, goals, and objectives. Second category was health and safety. If the project or initiative was related to health, safety, or security, this could also include items to facilitate remote work, customer access, and social distancing. Economic recovery, this is related to Oak Harbor's economic recovery. Restarting or resuming, this would be a project or initiative related to a business or city operation resumption. And then the next 2 are part of the phase 1 proposal that we provided to the council on July 13th and June 30th workshop. Category 5 would be phase 1 effective management, to ensure that the funds and/or programs are tracked and reported correctly and allocated efficiently, to ensure that we comply with all the different rules and regulations regarding this federal funding. Also, immediate response, to provide assistance to those most in need, to ensure essential workers are prepared and equipped, getting city facilities to open safely, helping the wider recovery reopen, and ensuring employee retention and competitive workforce. The next 2 are from phase 2. Category 7 would be resilience and investment, ensuring public safety gear and equipment and training is optimized. installing resiliency and security improvements for facilities and technology infrastructure, continuing with economic development investments. And the final category is innovation and optimization, looking for work productivity investments and process improvements, effective positioning for future workforce needs, and effective improvements to ensure customer service needs. So the three subsets we created, well, there were 134 initiatives and projects that were listed, and we received a few more in the past 5 days as well that didn't make it in time for the agenda packet. So the list is, it's kind of a living list. But of the 134 initiatives that are included in the backup, the total funding need was $17.1 million, which is about 3 times the amount of funding that we will be receiving from this program. So we broke things up into different subsets. Subset 1 was either a department budget or capital plan high priority, and the total funding need from subset 1 was about $11.3 million. Subset 2 are the number of different categories checked. So out of the 8 categories I talked about before, if the project or initiative or expense met 1 category out of the 8, the total of those was $8 million. If 2 of the categories were checked, the total of those projects and initiatives was 7.1. And if 3 categories were checked, the total of those was 1.9 million. And then subset 3 in your backup were items that related to an immediate need and effective management, and the total need for those is about $1 million. And these funding estimates are not just 1 year, but these are over the life of the funding, the life of the project or initiative that are on those lists. So the committee consensus included the following recommendations: to focus on projects that the City Council had prioritized in the biennial budget or 6-year capital plan or CIP. Look for ways to fund operational projects, expenses, initiatives with ARPA funding in lieu of using the city's scarce and more flexible resources. Ensure that we put in place effective program grants management via the creation of a term-limited finance grants manager position, which will be funded from this funding source through the end of December 2024. And also to assist in the reopening and continued efficient operations, restore the program assistant position for the senior center, and that would be funded through ARPA through the end of 24, and then afterwards would be funded conventionally. So next steps. So staff is seeking City Council input for the following. The ARPA committee recommended a budget amendment to use ARPA funds for the term limited finance grant manager position, and also for the restoration of the program assistant position for the senior center. And the ARPA committee to consider other immediate needs, including PPE funding, and to replenish our stock from what we purchased through the CARES Act, which is expired, and perhaps other items from phase 1 and prioritization lists. The ARPA committee will continue to work further on prioritization and future recommendations to the City Council. And as there are members from the ARPA subcommittee, of course, on the City Council, we open the floor to discussion from those members or from any person on the City Council.
Mayor Pro Tem, I don't know if you can see hands. I think this is the pause for questions.
Jim Wiesner, please.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Yes, David, I'll jump in and help with a little bit of thought, obviously on the council's end, or the committee's end. We, as the committee, we realize we've got through 2024 to commit these funds. So, we're kind of saying, there's a lot out there, right? And it has a pretty big list that David presented to us, and understanding, the thought process behind it. There's areas where maybe we can speed up funding on something that's important that the city's already got on its capital improvement list, and use these funds to do it, and then free up those funds from the CIP project for other projects that maybe do not meet the requirement of the funds. And so there's a lot to go through there. In the meantime, of course, staff has come to us with two immediate needs, and these were two needs that we thought kind of made sense. One was the program assistant position. That is a person we had planned to restore. It's in the budget to plan and restore that person, and we all knew that when we were going to get the senior center back up and operating to full speed, that this was a position that we were going to restore. It was a position we actually hired just before the beginning of COVID, and then, of course, pulled back because of the shutdown. So we have the opportunity here to use ARPA funds rather than senior center funds to do this. It's part of the getting back and operating, and so we just kind of thought that was probably a pretty good use. We've got some issues coming up with the senior center roof that we're still trying to figure out how to fund, and this would help keep some of the money in that budget to maybe help with that. And then the limited finance grant manager position, obviously somebody's got to manage this grant. We've been through this before. These federal grants are quite cumbersome and time consuming. Not only do we have we tasked Mr. Goldman's office with coming up with all these ideas for us and researching all these different ideas and creating all these flow charts we've been looking at. And again, you get it. It's a lot of stuff. We've got to manage this and make sure that we don't get ourselves in trouble, find ourselves having to pay some of this money back. Now, one of the things I had suggested here was not only do we make this person our grant manager, but we also look for somebody in this position that is a grant writer. I think we have some opportunity to multitask this position and have this position not only manage this particular series of grants, but also maybe write some grant applications for us and some other things coming up. So that was at least my thought behind that. So Mr. Goldman's spot on with what came out of that committee. We felt as though it was important to come back before council with these two kind of immediate needs and then continue to take the slow approach on figuring out the rest of this. We've got lots of time to do it. We've got lots of things to look at. We've got lots of things that we can do that we had either already planned to do or maybe we can answer or maybe we can do sooner. Obviously, we have the opportunity to take this money and put it into stuff that we're all going to be able to touch and see and feel years from now and know that we were able to do it because of these funds. And so, like I say, Mr. Goldman's spot on with, I think, certainly what I expected him to come back with a presentation the day of. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilman Wiesner. Councilman Servadius.
Thank you. Thank you to the committee and to staff. Obviously, there's a lot of work going into all of this behind the scenes to prioritize these funds. The thought that comes to mind when we look at the amount of building that we're hopefully, or the new housing stock that we'll see here coming online in the next 12, 24 months, I think of engineering. Are we staffed up in engineering, and should any of these funds be directed, and maybe they are further down in the minutia of all the documents, but do we have resources going over there and getting those positions filled and staffed back up so that we can issue permits on time in addition to everything else we're doing in the city? I kind of want to use this money to make money and not just speed up maybe some capital improvement projects that we want to do. It's always nice to speed things up, but I'm looking longer term at getting those homes built and what that means to the city long term. So any thoughts there? How are we doing? That's the one department I'm specifically thinking of.
Thank you. Anybody want to respond to that question?
David, do you want me to respond?
It would probably make sense for either you or somebody from engineering to respond, but probably you.
I'll go ahead and respond on it. The necessary staff for engineering is really a product of what we decide to do. So one thing we've learned with better project management. And we do have an interim public works director coming on that has a lot of experience in doing work planning and such. And so something we want to focus on is making sure you have the resources to do the project. So as we go through this and prioritize it, I think we're going to want to make sure we use that project management skill and making sure that we have the resources when we do these projects so that we can complete it. As far as the short term here, we have our consultant that's doing a great job on doing the development now. We had some change order promotion, so we're trying to recruit a position in project manager, our project engineer in engineering, and so we're certainly working on that. We do have a GIS tech position starting on Monday, and that was part of we put some extra positions in the budget for engineering, so that's coming on board, and that certainly will help. And GIS was discussed earlier, and we committed to giving you further update on that. So that's an area where certainly we can get more robust on. And then also David's working on the permitting software, and certainly that has a lot of aspects there in bringing through automation and tying to GIS and other services. So we're certainly working. I have some growth to do, so I have some changeover that's kind of slowed us down, but I think we're on the right track for coming back up. And if we take on some more projects here, we'll certainly want to look at getting services either in consulting or internal staff to make sure we can complete the projects that we plan.
Yeah, and I could add to that, Blaine, as far as, the research I've done for other cities, what they've spent their money on as far as personnel goes, most cities are adding folks to the finance staff to manage the grant. A lot of cities are also adding outreach folks to provide public outreach depending on whatever funding program they come up with. And then folks are also using that bucket, I think it's bucket number 2C, to rehire folks who were laid off as part of, the COVID-induced recession. I could continue to do further research to see what other types of employees they're using their funding for. But of course, every city is different. Every city has different needs. So if our need is development, that's our need.
All right, any other questions? Thank you, Mr. Goldman and Mr. Oburn. Any other questions?
Councilmember Heisen has her hand up.
All right, thank you. Councilman Heisen, please.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I just wanted to chime in and urge the council to support the immediate next steps in terms of staffing. That is getting the grant manager or coordinator position, and then helping the senior center get up and running, I think are really immediate needs. So I really appreciate the presentation, Mr. Goldman. That's a lot of information to try to distill, and I appreciate all the attachments and the emails that you've been sending. And hopefully council can get moving on these first steps right away, and we can start looking at some more of the details soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Councilman Heisman. Anyone else? All right, let's go on to public safety needs analysis, costs, funding, options, and outreach.
Just before we go on, so I just want to provide a little overview of the next steps. So we will be bringing a budget amendment back in September for the items that are on this slide. But we can start the recruitment to start building a list of interested candidates now, and then of course not do anything with it until of course the budget amendment's passed. That makes sense.
Sure, better than last minute trying to find quality, and if we don't, then we just keep the position open until filled. Sometimes we jump to the gun too quick and should really look for the best quality people. Anything else, Mr. Goldman?
No, sorry about that. I just.
Oh, no. I'm glad you interrupted. Thank you. All right, public safety needs analysis, cost, funding, and options with Mr. Goldman, Chief Merrill, and Chief Dressler, please.
All right, I'll start it off. And Councilmember Heisen said that the last item had a lot of information to take in. Well, I think this one's going to blow that out of the water. So just to give an introduction, this is an item that administration, finance, and public safety leadership has been working on for about a year now. This presentation will demonstrate the current levels of public safety service that the city provides the residents, the business community, and visitors with potential ideas on how to improve those levels. The presentation will start with Chief Merrill going over fire service levels and improvements, then move on to Chief Dresker for police service levels and improvement needs. And then I will go over potential funding methods, funding options, the timing of those options, and we will close with Sabrina, who will go over potential outreach methods. So without further ado, I would like to give you Chief Merrill.
Are you going to share the screen so I got my pictures? I need my pictures.
Oh yeah.
Got to have those.
All right, let me know when you're ready.
There's no pictures, David.
Oh, you don't see it?
Yeah, there's no
Oh,
PowerPoint.
it's not being shared, is it? My bad.
PowerPoint.
Let me get to this Ring Central stuff. I thought it was shared. There you go.
Okay, thank you, David. Good afternoon, council. A lot of this stuff you've seen in the past, but I want to review some of this information. And I would ask that if you have a question, probably throughout the presentation, maybe stop me then and ask at that point, because we do have a lot of stuff to get through. So let's go ahead and get started, David. It says fire department. How did we get here? And unfortunately, I'm going to have to ask David each time to move us forward. So go to the next one. So we know that back in 1992, we put our fire station over on Whidbey Avenue. As we know, the fire station used to be across the street from City Hall, where the ICOM Dispatch Center is now. And at the time that we made that move, we thought we were pretty much in the center of the city. Go ahead. So looking back at 1990, we had a population of about 17,000 people, 3.3 square miles, 6,100 homes, and we had 2 full-time firefighters. Good. In 20, we jumped up in population a little over 19,000. We had a pretty good jump in size to 8.7 square. We had about 1,600 more homes coming in, and we did increase to 10 firefighters. Moved to 2010. You see that our population did increase. The size of the city did increase. Our homes increased, but we still had 10 firefighters. And then in 2020, our population's up about 23.5. 9.7 square miles, a little over 9,000 homes, and we were able to increase 1 career position to 11. Good. So we've had a lot of growth take place. Now this slide is really kind of fun because we're looking at, there we go. We're looking at 1990, what the city looked like back in 1990. But let's jump forward to 2020 and look at the change in what the city has done in the number of houses and all the growth that's happened around the city. Now go to the next one, David.
There we go.
There we go. And all that purple indicates new growth, new homes, new developments, revision to developments. Now, I will tell you that some of these growths are outside of the county in a couple of little small pockets, but predominantly that is the city of Oak Harbor's growth areas. Go ahead. We know the station's up on Whidbey Avenue. And we know that there's a 1.5 mile radius that I'm going to talk about a little bit more in depth when we start talking about NFPA requirements and Washington Survey and Rating Bureau requirements. So remember that 1.5 mile radius. I've brought this up before. And go ahead. And we know that now, by the Fair and Pierce study we had done in 2016, 24% of our homes are outside of that 1.5 mile radius. And I'll talk more about that in depth here just a little bit. Go ahead, David. So we know back in 2006, we had a company come up and take a look at our growth, our operations, and look at some strategic direction that we needed to look at. And part of that, go ahead, David. Back in 2006, JTS and Associates says you need an additional fire station in the southwest area of the city, just because of projected growth. Back then, we started collecting fire fees in order to help pay for permits and all that stuff for the station. And as you may remember, that we had to return all those permit fees because we didn't spend the money the way we were supposed to. And
Yep,
since
82,000.
What's that?
$82,000.
Yeah, $82,000 we had to refund. Since 2006, we've annexed an additional 216 acres of land into the city, so we know that growth is taking place. Go ahead. And then in 2016, we had an analysis done by Fair and Peers, which they again told us that 24% of our call volume is not within the 4-minute, 1.5-mile radius required by Survey and Rating Bureau and NFPA. Go ahead. And we know that our largest gap is in the west side. We know we're going to get a lot of growth in the southwest quadrant. We know that additional staffing at Station 81 will not help response times. Now let me clarify that just a little bit. It will, if we had multiple calls and we had staffing in the station, the response time is going to remain the same. The difference is if I've got one crew out, at least I've got a second crew that can take the next vehicle out, which, yes, the response time is the same, but if we had to wait 4 minutes for our paid on call to come in, that's going to be the difference. We know that a fire station in the southwest area has been recommended. There was 4 potential sites. We've looked at one potential site that seems to work the best. And we know that that southwest station is going to meet all of our future needs, at least in the southwest quadrant. So we take a look at the ratings. When we look at the cascade of events, and I want to break this down into a couple parts. Things are normal. Everything's going just fine. Something happens. There's the discovery of the event. Go to the next one, please. So the alarm is transmitted. Now I'm going to break this down a little bit. We have a fire alarm. The fire alarm goes to the central station. The central station has 90 seconds from the time they receive that alarm to dispatch that alarm to our ICOM dispatch center. ICOM then has another 90 seconds to dispatch that to us. So we've already lost 3 minutes in just the alarm handling time. That doesn't include our turnout time, our travel time, or any of that stuff as part of that response time. That's 3 additional minutes that fire has the potential to grow. Go ahead. So Survey and Rating Bureau and the ISO rating, which has to do with the insurance industry, we've been rated before, and they evaluate what we do. So part of it is our equipment, part of it is our operations, part of it is the water system, and part of it has to do with the 911 center. And it's used by insurance companies to look at what property tax insurance rates are going to be. The better the protection, the lower the rate. We utilize it for planning, budgeting, what we need to do in the future. So go ahead, David. So fire department operations is where we got hit the hardest the last time we were re-rated. And in part of that operations was lack of staff, travel distances too far, response times too long, insufficient amount of staff for multiple operations, and insufficient staff for initial operations. Go ahead. So as you know, we have a class 4 rating, which is really good. When you look at the rating, 1 being the best and 10 being the worst, we're sitting currently at a 4. We were re-rated in 2013. Go ahead, David. We were re-rated in 2013. We were trying to get to a 3. By the time it was all said and done, we remained a class 4. And again, our biggest deficiencies was response time, staffing, and availability of staffing. Good? And if we were reevaluated in 2021, we would likely today drop to a 5 and potentially a 6. I called around some different insurance companies and what that premium would look like between a 4, a 5, and a 6. And some of the insurance companies said you could see up to a 25% increase in insurance premiums, both in commercial and or residential, going from a 4 to a 6. So, and it depends on the insurance company that you talk to. Go ahead. So when we talk about standards, when we take a look at our response times, and you saw this in our annual report, all of our incidents right now, our average response time has been 5 minutes and 54 seconds, which is a 1 minute and 5 second increase over the previous year. And there's multiple reasons for this. One is the distance that we're going to have to travel. As I showed at the annual report, it was 8 minutes to get to a structure fire. That affects our response time. On average, we're at 7 minutes and 15 seconds on structure fires. We are compliant 77% of the time at 4 minutes or less. Our turnout time is 39% compliance at 80 seconds or less. And the reason for that is when we have multiple calls. If our first engine company is already out the door and we have to wait for the second crew to come in, that goes against our turnout time. So if my engine company is gone, or if my engine company is at the very north end of the city, and I've got to wait for a crew to arrive, that's going to increase our turnout time. And a good example, today, at about 9 o'clock this morning, we had 3 calls going on at the same time. I had an engine company over on the southwest quadrant. I had to send one person on a rescue to a medical call, and I had to send one more person by themselves to another medical call. To me, it's not safe to send one person on a medical incident. So that affects our turnout time. When we take a look at medical calls, we're at 5 minutes and 9 seconds. Again, to be compliant, we're at 68% of the time at 4 minutes or less. And our turnout time is 40% compliance with NFPA standards at 60 seconds or less. And again, that comes back to, if we're already on a first call, we're waiting for staff to come in for the second call. Okay? So when we look at NFPA standards, NFPA 1710 sets up the response times for our fires. For the first arriving engine should be on scene in 4 minutes or less, 90% of the time with an 80-second turnout time. So we take a look at the fires that we're going to, we should be there 4 minutes or less, 90% of the time that we're responding. Go ahead, David. Of course, you see our response time at 7 minutes and 15 seconds. We're 77% compliant. So we are below that standard by NFPA. Go ahead. So.
All right.
This is a video.
Go ahead, Ray. You can introduce it. I'm going to have to switch the audio, though.
Okay. This is a video. This fire happened on Sunday last month. It happened at 8:39 in the morning, and this was a 4-minute response time from the time that we were dispatched, as soon as you see the video come up, until our first engine was on scene. This is 2 separate buildings separated by at least 25 feet of space. When you watch the video, you're going to see the amount of fire and the amount of thermal energy that was created, and I really hope this video comes up because it's very telling. And this is at 4 minutes. Imagine what it would have been if we would have had a 6 or 7 or an 8-minute response time. We would have had 2 commercial buildings fully involved in fire. The one to the left, the one to the right. The one to the left was an 8-unit apartment complex. The one to the right is a 12 or 14-unit complex. 8:30 in the morning. Neither building had an automatic fire alarm system in it, so there was no early warning. Neither building had a fire sprinkler system in it. Yes?
Is that not up to code?
It was at code at the time it was constructed.
Okay.
See, and you run a real fine line. Can we retroactively go back and require them to sprinkle or to bring up the alarm system? There's got to be a trigger that says this is why you need to do it. Either you remodeled, you did more work than 60% of the assessed valuation of the structure to bring it up to current code. So, David, were we able to get the video to work?
Here we go. I'm going to share the computer sound now, and then I'll get the video. Here we go.
All right, so this is a 4-minute response time. And this is what this fire looked like in 4 minutes from the time we got the call. And this is one of our fires. One of our firefighters had a helmet camera on, and this is what they saw. So what you're seeing is exactly what was on his camera. There was an injury in this fire. We had one gentleman with smoke inhalation, cuts, and burns. He was in the lower apartment that was on fire there. We got the apartment to the right. This is where we almost sprayed the apartment to the right. That fire had just started to breach into the attic space. Another 2 or 3 minutes and that fire would have raced through the attic in that structure and broken the exterior wall and got into the building. No injuries on the building to the right. The one gentleman on the left was injured. But we were able to get everybody out. That's at 4 minutes from the time we were dispatched. You can see how quickly that fire grew. Okay?
All right. Next. All right.
So when we look at medical incidents, we have to have 2 trained EMTs when we respond. And we're supposed to respond in 4 minutes or less, 90% of the time with a 60-second turnout time. Again, if I've only got a 3-person or a 4-person crew on, and the engine company is out, we're waiting for staff to come back in, our paid-on-call staff to come back in to fill that second unit. Last year, we had concurrent calls 17% of the time. You can see that we've been hitting about 5 minutes and 9 seconds for response times in medical, and we've hit the standard 80 or 68% of the time. So NFPA says that for each engine company, you're supposed to have 4 firefighters on board. For each ladder truck, you should have 4 firefighters on board, 5 if you're in a high-rise situation, and a minimum of 1 command officer. Go ahead. And by NFPA 17 standards, which we fall under, we are supposed to respond 2 engine companies, 1 ladder truck, a command officer, a rapid intervention team, and a safety officer to a residential structure fire. Go ahead, David. That's 16 people before we can do any interior firefighting unless there's a known life hazard. That's per WAC 296-305. So if we went to a structure fire and I didn't have 16 people on the scene and I knew everybody was out of that building, we're going to watch the building burn to the ground, because I will not get 16 people to the scene in a reasonable period of time to extinguish that fire. Even if I call mutual aid from NAS, which is a fantastic mutual aid partner, or if I call mutual aid from North Whidbey Fire and Rescue, they will get there as quickly as they possibly can, but they too have reduced staffing issues. So for us to get 16 people, it takes a long time to amass that amount. We always go to the fire, and this is our theory or our priorities, is we believe that structure is occupied until we prove that it is not. We don't go on other people's words to say, yep, everybody's out. And the reason being, a few years ago, we had, not us, but North Whidbey Fire and Rescue that we assisted, we were told that everybody was out of the structure, and when we did an interior search, we found a deceased female in the house who should have been alive, but everybody said she was out. Go ahead, David. So Survey and Rating Bureau is going to tell us that we should have 1.5 mile radius. We should meet all of the NFPA standards. We should have the 4-minute response time. When we take a look at that 1.5 mile radius, we look at where the new Howard Point division's going in, and that's 3.2 miles away. We know that Survey and Rating Bureau is going to credit our personnel to respond to first alarm structures. We get a 3-to-1 ratio on our paid on call. For every 3 of those we get credit for 1 career person responding to an incident. You know that we have 11 full-time firefighters and 32 paid on call firefighters. Now, unfortunately, one of the issues we've run into recently with our paid on call is when the Navy, when COVID came through, the Navy restricted their firefighters that volunteer for us from responding with us for 6 months. So we were without their staffing, that extra 9 people for 6 months. Could happen again, we don't know.
Oh.
So, whoops.
I'm going too fast, right?
You went too fast. So we know council quite a few years ago established 4 minutes for medical calls and 5 minutes for fires. We can't meet that standard anymore. It just doesn't happen. I know we missed a slide in between there, but go ahead, David, let's hit staffing. There we go.
Oh, sorry.
Okay. So, council said 4 minutes and 5 minutes. So our staffing, go ahead, David. And you've seen this slide before. I bring it up occasionally. When we look at like cities that we use as comparables, with our career staff, we operate with 1/4 to 1/3 fewer firefighters than our comparable size cities. That works out to, we have 11 firefighters on staff, career firefighters on staff, and our comparables have 28 on staff. That's going to work out to 0.45 firefighters per one. Go ahead, David. Per 1,000, compared to our comparable cities at 1.2 firefighters. Again, career firefighters per 1,000 population. We're running at almost a half. Go ahead, David. So when we look at minimum staffing, there's numerous times throughout every month that we have only three firefighters and one command officer on staff for the entire city. If we had full staffing during Monday through Thursday, we've got our command officer, which could be the training officer or Deputy Chief Buxton. We have 4 people on the engine company, and then 2 of us ride on the rescue. So myself and either Craig or Mike on the rescue, 4 people on the engine. Good? Ideally, there'd be my position, our deputy chief position, a command officer, 4 on the engine for now, and 2 on the rescue, just so that we had 2 additional staffing. Go ahead, David. And again, remember that number 16 keeps popping up if we went to a structure fire. And I have to look at risk analysis. What am I willing to risk if I don't have full staffing to go inside of a burning building? Am I willing to write off a building? We've got 32 paid on-call firefighters. They do provide manpower. They do respond back to the station. Go ahead, David. We know that we're a combination department with 11 full-time and 32 paid on-call. When we look at the day shift, Monday through Thursday, you can see on the slide on the left the staffing that we have. And then you can see on the right the staffing that we have at night with 1 captain and 4 paid on-call firefighters. Go ahead. We know that our 9 full-time career firefighters, not including Chief Buxton and myself, average 18 years of service. We know our folks earn about 32 hours of leave each month on average. And right now, our department has over 9,500 hours of leave on the books. Because they don't take a lot of leave. They don't use a lot of sick leave, but it's available. Go ahead, David. When you take a look at this schedule, every place you see a yellow is where one of our captains is off, whether they're on a Kelly day or on a vacation day. We know there are 66 dates, 24-hour shifts where our captains were on vacation. You can see that there's 34 firefighter leave dates. We try to cover that with our lieutenant that we've hired. We have to hire back on overtime. We're going to operate short-staffed. We get creative with Chief Buxton, myself, and Craig Anderson working night shifts and working overnight in order to fill the shifts. We flex days, and you can just see the shortage that there is. Unfortunately, on this picture, you can't see it as well. The days the firefighters are on leave. But that all affects our operation. So just imagine that I've got my captain on, I've got a career firefighter that's on vacation, I've got a career firefighter that's working, I've got a paid on call that's scheduled to be on shift, and the night before they call and say they're sick, they can't come in, now I've got a 2-person crew. Happens frequently. So, David, go ahead. So, our paid on calls, they determine their work schedule of our shifts that we have. There's 4 12-hour shifts at night, 1 day shift. They can trade, they can drop shifts, they can move shifting around, and they're going to respond via pagers when available. Go ahead, David. So if you take a look at this month, August, every place you see a yellow is where I was short-staffed, where they're not filling a day shift. And this all has to do with work schedules, people working at the base. One of our paid on call works 2 weeks in Alaska and then is back here for 2 weeks. Some of our paid on call, 9 of them work at the Navy base. They work 48 hours at the base. They may get a mandatory shift at the base where they're working a 72, so they have to cancel with us, or they just can't fill those shifts. So every place there's a blank spot, we're short. Go ahead, David. And sometimes it's difficult to fill those shifts. Trying to get shifts to come back. We've had to hire career staff in order to backfill some of the vacated paid-on-call shifts. Go ahead, David. And then one of our firefighters, one of our paid-on-call, had to go in for emergency surgery. And as you notice, we went from 15 vacant shifts to 28 vacant shifts for the month. So every place there was the yellow before, you can see the highlight in green, that now we're down to 28 vacant shifts throughout the month. And again, this means that we've got to hire people back or we just run short-staffed down to a minimum of 3. So if we have additional staffing, we should be able to achieve some minimum staffing levels, both on our engine and our rescue, help to maintain our insurance ratings, maintain our current response times. Not necessarily it's going to get better, but at least maintain them. Alleviate some shortages due to vacancies that we are seeing that's getting more prevalent. And something we have to look at is we need to do some succession planning, because there's 5 of us that could retire today or in the next 3 years. 5. That's half of our career staff. Go ahead, David. So one of the proposals that's going to come up that David's going to talk about later is hiring some additional personnel. I've brought this up before, for 2 lieutenants, 2 full-time firefighters, and 8 paid on call. And potentially what's going to happen is those folks, when we eventually get that station on the southwest quadrant, those folks are going to help man that station as well, those positions. Go ahead, David. So our apparatus and our station, when we look at comparables with our like-sized cities, we have 1 station, they have at least 2. Go ahead, David. We know we've grown by 5.7 square miles since 1992, which is a lot of growth. We're at 9.7, running out of 1 station. There's 3,123 more housing units, with the potential of another 500 to be built. And you know, once those houses are built, they're ours forever to take care of. We have to make sure, if we have to go to medical calls, fire calls, so the more houses that are out there, the more stuff that we have to protect, more citizens that are in town. We know there's 6,000 more residents since 1992. That's a lot of people to protect. Go ahead, David. So that's our conceptual design. You've seen this slide before, from the stuff that we did in 2016. That's an idea what the floor plan would look like. It's considerably smaller than Station 81, and the intent is to put a pump engine in there, or an engine company, a quint, living quarters, a meeting room, but considerably smaller than our existing facility. Go ahead, David. And this is a breakdown of potential operating expenses and costs, including the 20-year bond payment. Okay? Of course, that's what we look like today. The apparatus that we have, some really good-looking apparatus. Our guys take very good care of their equipment. One of the proposals, of course, we got deficiency points because we didn't have 2 ladder trucks. We have a ladder truck. By Survey and Rating Bureau, we're required to have a reserve ladder, which we do not have, so we depend on NAS. Go ahead, David. So part of the potential is to purchase a quint. That quint would act as a pumper as well as a ladder, and we get credit for both of those vehicles. We've got some pumpers that we need to replace that are from 1998. They're getting up there in age, as you can see, and we do need a quint. That way we put this in the new station. We can do medical, we can do high-rise, we can do firefighting. It's a multi-use tool, not just limited to one use as an engine is. Okay, David? You can see what the cost breakdown is for the quint to replace a 24-year-old engine. And then we also have to look at, replacing the other 1998 Seagraves. Go ahead, David. You can take a look at this. It's the breakdown of some of the costs. David's going to talk about this a little bit later on, as far as cost breakdowns, what we're looking at, and potential funding sources. Good? That's the end of my presentation, and I would be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Chief. Council, questions? Slow for hands. Councilman Servadius.
Thank you. Chief, I think a comment and possibly two questions. One, thank you. We know there's a need. The need only continues to grow as the housing in the southwest quadrant expands. If we could back up I think it was one slide, maybe it was two. David? No, sorry. The graph there. Go forward. There we go. So as always, the question comes up, well, how do we pay for this? And you said David's going to touch on this, so maybe you can just say that question's coming up. We know there's a need. The need only continues to grow. The question is, how do we pay for this? And if we're looking at adding 1.6 million to the general fund, because that's predominantly how we pay for fire and police, I'm just curious where that will come from. So that might be a question coming up. And then the other question I had was, I know you guys, you send out the reports to us with your monthly calls. There's a fair amount of medical calls, and kind of a funny story, but Paul Shore can tell you sometime about a medical call that I was participating in when he showed up. But I'm curious, is there a solution you've thought about? A lot of times we have to roll out the engine with the crew to a basic medical call. And we have the rescue truck. In this scenario moving forward, is there a way to send out, if we have a medical call, to send out those two folks rather than having to roll out the engine, put the wear and the tear on the engine, and still be able to respond in a timely manner if a fire call comes in? So two-part question. Two questions. How do we pay for the 1.6 moving forward? And then is there a way to get creative if we do add some staff that we could service some of these basic medical calls with just the rescue rig and not a full engine crew?
I'll take the first part of the question. We are going to go over some options on how to fund these proposals after Kevin's done with his section. And then Ray, I guess you got the second part.
Okay, you done, David? Okay, Mr. Cervantes, excellent question. Long answer, and I'll try to keep it as brief as possible, but I'll do my best. We go on about 54% medical calls, which is an inverse number compared to most fire departments. Most of them are 80 to 90% medical. Because of our agreement with the hospital paramedics go first. They call us when they need assistance. If I only have a 3-person crew on, and if I send 2 on the rescue, then I have nothing to get the engine out. If there's a fire, a car accident, a hazardous material incident, I have nothing to respond with if my 2 firefighters are on the rescue. If I send the engine, it's more expensive to send the engine, but if we can break away quickly from the medical call, then I've got an engine company that can go handle a fire, a hazardous material incident, or whatever. Some departments, Mount Vernon being one, will send 1 person on the engine and send 1 person on their rescue vehicle because they only have a crew of 2 on board. And that way they go in tandem all the time with both vehicles. So it's difficult. If I had a full crew and I had a 5-person company in the station, I would assign 2 people to the rescue, 3 people to the engine. Rescue and engine would go to all fires. Rescue would go by itself to medical calls. So I hope that answers it for you.
It does, and it's helpful. So it sounds like maybe in the future, if we're able to fund 1, or it looked like you're looking at 2 positions in the immediate future, that could become a reality. And I also look at that app, the I Am Responding app. So in that app, when I see somebody going on a medical call, is that that's not a paramedic call, or do we see those as well in that app?
You see anything that we respond to, you see nothing that the hospital goes to on their own. So
okay.
The agreement that we have with the hospital is we go to all CPR calls on the initial response. We go to all car accidents on the initial response. We will go on an initial response if Whidbey's 1, 2, 6, 7, and potentially 8 are all out of service on the north end, and there's no ambulances available, then we will go initially. Otherwise, we only go when the paramedic unit requests our assistance.
Okay. All right, that's all for now. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other council questions? Chief, I'll throw one in here. It says 2 firefighters and 2 lieutenants. That means 2 people will be promoted up to lieutenant? Or is that 4 people you're wanting to hire?
That's 4 that we're gonna want to hire.
Okay.
There'll be multiple ways to get to lieutenant position. We may have to go outside because we don't have enough staffing. We may be able to hire from in-house to hire the 2 lieutenants. If that happens, then we need to go out and hire 2 replacement firefighters on top of the additional 2 firefighters that we would be hiring.
Okay, thank you very much.
Sure.
Any other questions? All right, let's move on to the other chief in the house, please. Chief Dressler, please.
Yep, just a mic check. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So David, you have control. Thank you. And we'll pause here for just a second. And I didn't provide some slides. And after hearing Ray, I want to touch on a couple of details regarding our department and where we're at. By the way, part of our building is the old fire department that that Ray was referring to, that they gave up. So we leased part of that out to ICOM. We also have part of it as our training room and as part of our building. Oak Harbor PD, as you are aware, you authorized the 2 additional positions a couple of years ago as we made some changes internally and converted some correction staff to jail staff to police. We're currently operating at around 1.2 officers per 1,000 population. The state average, unfortunately, I don't have the current one, and it's a little hard to get right now with some of the dynamics going on. But it was about 2 years ago, 1.47 per 1,000, and the national average was about 2.4 officers per 1,000. And again, I don't know if that's current with some of the movements that have gone on out there. Now, that being said, we're very comfortable with the authorized strength that we have for police officers here in Oak Harbor. We believe we can handle our calls, do proactive work, coordinate with the community, and do all that stuff with the numbers we have. The difference for us is not necessarily where we're at with numbers, but hiring and retaining quality officers with a lot of the current environment that's going on out there. And of course, we're seeing now with some officers who are leaving for other reasons and different reasons. But as we recruit, that'll be a consistent issue for us with the declining pool of people who want to move into this field. Also, we, of course, have experienced I didn't do the detailed growth thing like Ray has. I appreciate, because I'm going to steal his. So we've experienced the same growth in the city as what fire has, obviously, with law enforcement. We added those 2 positions a couple of years ago, which is the first time in, I think, around 10 years that we added positions. And we also had the same geographic growth as well as population growth that fire has. We're a little different, of course. Our officers are generally out in their cars and can generally respond, I guess, generally quicker because it's a little different, and they're not in the station necessarily. And then even if they're in the station, they have a little more capability of responding quicker because they don't have to drive the big fire trucks and that kind of thing. But we do have those same types of issues. And of course, as I discussed with you back when we looked at those officers, we look at multiple things within a police department. What's the population? We can have 2 to 4 officers on the street at any given time, and that could be it. We might at night have just 2 officers on, but we look at population, you look at your calls, you look at serious crimes, you look at your crime rate, you look at a lot of things. So it's not necessarily the population strictly. It's also how many serious crimes do we respond to or have to deal with, in addition to all the smaller crimes. You have to look at what you service within your community, not necessarily just population. So all that in context, the authorized strength that we currently have is a good number for us. All right, now we'll move on. So if you could, next slide, please. And next. So a little bit of history, just throw this in there. The current police station from everything I could find, was built in the 50s, remodeled in 59, or built in 59, and was multi-purpose, but there's been a lot of modifications since then. So next slide. 72 was a major remodel, and then 79 was the second one. This plaque is actually on the outside of our building. So apparently the third remodel, from what I can locate, brought us to the current structure that our building is. Next slide. Can you go back real quick? So really 72 is when it looks like this, you could call the birth of this building where we're in, and then moving forward. So it's an old building, but as far as, we're not requesting a new police station. I think this is adequate size and capability for us. It's not designed well for a police station because of a lot of factors, but we make do with it. So I think we're good with what we have, with some slight modifications. Next slide. So part of what we're looking to try to do is some expansion. We're still waiting for, we're contracting with another organization to do our inmate housing, and we're working with Island County. We're still waiting to hear back from another jail who's telling me any day now, or by the end of the month, we're hoping to hear, to see about contracting jail services. As we're currently running, we're not housing inmates in our jail overnight. We'll keep them here from anywhere from a very short time to maybe up to a day, but we're not housing them. So we have our jail cell. Our jail, of course, is built in the late 50s, and it's empty, but we need to use a couple of the cells and then potentially try to use some for storage or remodel. The area you see in front, which is in red. So I don't know, can you see my pointer on here? Yeah, David, can you go from there to the left and then over more and then up? So all that area you just saw there in red is our building, but it's disconnected from our main portion of the building. The area in the square red box, I had talked to an architect a while back who I knew, and we talked about this. Ideally, if we had the ability, we would enclose that area between that front night lobby area, which we're not using anymore, and the other building, to make it all one fluid building as part of a remodel, add some office space, different things like that, and be much more efficient and effective with those two things connected, and also add just a little bit of space we need. Next slide, please. So this is just another picture of some of our interior. What you see on the far left on the very top picture is that night lobby, and that would be an area where we'd look to be trying to enclose that to join the two buildings. And you can see the overhead again. And then if we had additional funds available to do it, we would look at trying to remodel a little bit of our jail. You see our control room there and some other areas. Next slide, please. This is just some additional pictures. This is our jail, which again, right now is not being used other than just temporary holding. You see on the right some of the amounts, which I think are included in the tally that'll be presented later by David. Next. And these would be one-time costs as a possibility. So we've got a current MRAP. We'd be looking at if funds became available for around 200, 225, something like that, thousand, replacing that MRAP, which is an older vehicle, heavy, larger. We'd replace it with a smaller one as a rescue vehicle. It's an armored vehicle. I'll just go in and rescue people who have been hurt by anything from gunfire to whatever the case may be, and also protect our officers. The Polaris there is just an ATV type of vehicle, which could be used in the new park that's being built up north when it's done. And also in our existing parks, we have bikes. This is something that would allow us to also be visible, go across the bridges, in the park, and allow us to pick up cones and signs or put them down, or whatever utility need we needed. And then we don't have drone program. We'd like to move into that for scouting, for evidence documentation, They're also great for search and rescue if you have kids lost, that kind of thing, and even searching for inmates if need be. A lot of requirements for that. We, of course, know that and would abide by all those requirements, state requirements, etc. And then you see a robot on there. We don't have one of those. There's a multi-purposes or multi-uses potentially for that. I think we also see that as something we're requesting in ARPA funds. You can send that into an environment, whether it's a hazardous environment or whether it's a possible explosive somewhere, or looking for a person or even a suicidal, and you can send that in without sending a person in and try to evaluate or manipulate some things. It's a big safety issue and also can certainly help decrease potential force issues. Okay, next. Okay, next. So personnel, to be clear, this would be supplementing as we've got the funding for our 28 officers. Two of the positions, you know, we converted or altered our jail process and eliminated two of our corrections officers. We're still stretched out there with the funding for them. So this would be looking for that funding for two officer positions to help maintain those so we don't have to look at doing any cuts or anything. And then an evidence technician, with the body worn cameras, with some of the evidence things that we've seen and increased responsibilities, there's a need for that additional position. So we'd be looking at trying to fund that. Next. And operational costs. Again, you council authorized the body worn cameras, which we're operating with. We were fortunate you moved forward with that. We moved forward with that prior to the newest legislation put out by our state politicians. All the other area law enforcement agencies are now moving towards body worn cameras. They've had to react to that. We were a little proactive, so we appreciate that from council. But we have continuing, we have a 5-year commitment on that, and then we're going to want to redo something, look for newer equipment, whether we want to do some warranty stuff or however we do it. We do have to maintain that. We have to maintain our evidence storage with the company. So we're looking for ongoing costs with that. Body worn vests, we do purchase those right now out of budget, but it is an item that if we had the funding for it, because it is a repetitive item, it's a mandatory item. We're bound by contract and bound by best practice to replace vests every 5 years, which is a manufactured recommendation. We do get some grant money for vests, but there's no guarantee. That's been cut down over the years. There's no guarantee how long that'll continue. And certainly we'd still use that grant money, but supplement it with money from this source if available. Next. And then I included some operational costs too. We have software that we have to have, from training software to policy software to public disclosure software and public records requests, et cetera. So all these software sources we pay for anywhere from, I think, $8,000 a year down. And we do get, like with Alexapol, we get some money, I think about $1,000 from a source for kind of like a grant, but we have I think that's the one that's about 8,000, something like that. Maybe it's 10. So anyways, we'd be looking at trying to utilize some of this funding source to offset those costs. And that would be this piece here. Next. Okay, and next. So we talked about this a little bit where we've altered our jail process. We're still in the process of waiting to hear back from one organization. We are contracting with SCORE right now. We're waiting to hear back from Skagit. We don't know for sure what a contract cost will look like with Skagit, and we do know what we've been doing with SCORE. Of course, COVID has made our inmate population less. So when and if that's gone, we're not sure what it's going to look like, but I've included costs for transportation, housing of inmates, replacement of a vehicle, and some staffing as we look at what it's going to look like for our whatever we end up with in our jail situation. Okay, go ahead. And vehicle fleet, I'm not asking for additional vehicles. What you see there on the vehicles is our current fleet. You authorized that 9th vehicle, which right now is being outfitted just like the one you see here, and we should have that next week. I think we're doing pretty well with our vehicles. We do have replacement cycles on these vehicles, which are due to be replaced at a certain number of years. Of course, we also look at it with Public Works and say, hey, do we really need to replace it at this point? You look at miles, you look at condition of the vehicle, you look at all that stuff. Fire does this, Public Works, everybody. We've got ours that we have to maintain. And we've got 6 bicycles. We'd like to replace those. We bought the electric bicycles. So we certainly have funding that we're dealing with on this, but if we have an alternate source that frees up that money for the city to use for other things or for us to apply in a different manner, however that's determined by the council at the time. So I've included replacement costs on this for you to look at. Next. David, did I go over this or did you go over it?
I'll be going over the numbers in detail later, but this basically contains the cost of all the projects and items you talked about on the previous slides. So this is kind of a recap.
So this is broken down into different years and, you know, the costs. So we do have one-time costs and we do have reoccurring costs, as you'll see in there. You see the one-time equivalent and then the expansion remodel, about $500,000 for expansion remodel. You know, whether that survives intact at a price range like that for what we'd like to do, if this all goes forward, is another question. As you guys know, with escalating construction costs and stuff, clearly we would want to either reevaluate it, or if we do move forward, we would just limit whatever we can do, but with whatever amount we have at our disposal at that time. And that's, I think, it. Is there another slide, David? Is that it?
Nope.
Okay. I guess I'll open that up to any questions for my presentation.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Mr. Goldman. Any council members with questions? Looks like there's no questions at this time, Chief.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it very much.
All right, thank you, Kevin. So I'll be going over the funding methods and options, and keep in mind that the numbers you're going to see throughout this presentation and in the agenda bill itself are estimates, and they're subject to change, just like Kevin talked about. Construction costs, you know, we're not sure where they're going to be in 6 months or even 1 month. Also keep in mind that the assessed value and levy figures will change in 2022 once we get the updated assessment from Island County. So there are 3 major sources of funding for the proposals that we went over on the previous slides. The first one is a levy lid lift. The second is an excess levy. And the third is a public safety sales tax, which the Washington State Legislature passed a few years ago, passed the ability for counties and cities to adopt a few years ago. So the first method is called a levy lid lift. It deals with property taxes. It permits increases over the 1% lid up to the statutory maximum levy rate, which I'll go over on a future slide. Majority voter approval required, which means 50% plus 1. They come in different flavors. The most common flavor is a single-year lift versus the multi-year lift. The single-year lift is permitted to go on the ballot in a special primary or general election, while the multi-year lid lift has to go in a primary or a general election. So the difference between the two is that with a single-year levy lift, the voters would approve an increase to the levy over that 1% cap, and then it would just stay there. It wouldn't continue you wouldn't have another lift the second year, third year, and fourth year. It would just go up by a certain amount, and it would stay at that level. With a multi-year lid lift, what the voters would be approving is multiple years of that amount going up. So it's just a different methodology to accomplish the task. So levy lid lifts are most commonly used for ongoing operational costs, such as payroll, utilities, maintenance, replacement reserves, and they're usually not used for debt service, because if they're used for debt service, the state law limits the debt to a maximum of 9 years. And most debt on major capital projects like a new facility are for longer than 9 years. So I mentioned a term called the statutory maximum levy. That is the highest rate a city can levy without using something called an excess levy, which I'll go over on the next slide. So because the city, well, normally a city would have a 3.6 levy rate as their statutory maximum levy, but because the city belongs to the Snow Isle Library District, the city's base maximum rate has been reduced from that 3.6 down to 3.176. The city's current certified rate is 1.9259, which is below the 3.176. And that 1.9259 raises about $4.5 million. Well, for 2021, we'll raise about $4.5 million. The voters can approve a rate up to that 3.176 with a majority vote, which would, well, yes, sorry about that. I shouldn't have said excess levy there. That should say levied lid lift. And that would raise an additional $2.9 million. Sorry about that typo. Excess levies. So an excess levy is also a property tax levy. It permits increases over the statutory maximum levy rate, which I talked about earlier. This supermajority voter approval is required, which is 60% plus one. And also we have to use something called validation, which I'll go over in the next slide. These excess levies are designed for the purpose of paying back long-term capital debt. It can only be used for new capital projects and vehicles, not replacements. This excess levy provides a stable revenue stream, and it's automatically sized each year to repay the debt. Once the debt has been repaid, this excess levy would cease. And an excess levy can be placed on a special primary or general election. So I talked about a term called validation. So for excess levies, validation means that in addition to the 60% supermajority vote requirement, the voter turnout must be at least 40% compared to the most recent general election. So we went back about 8 years or so to look at validation, to look at how special election turnout was compared to the previous general election. And in the 3 cases that we found, just looking at the city of Oak Harbor electorate, in each case, validation did occur. The turnout was above 40%, including in the February of this year's special election. I think for related to school bonds, I believe that turnout for the Oak Harbor district was over 40% compared to the very high turnout November 2020 general election. So the third methodology is a public safety sales tax. 1/3 of the revenues must be used for criminal justice or fire protection or both. Activities that assist the criminal justice system, including domestic violence services, community advocates, and legal advocates. The city can adopt a sales tax of up to 1/10 of a cent. It must be shared after, of course, the state takes the 1% share. And the share is 85% would go to the city and 15% would go to the county. And that would raise about $450,000. Now that would be if the city voters adopted this sales tax. Now the county voters can also adopt this sales tax, and that could go up to 0.3 of a cent. So that share is a little different. Of course, the state gets their 1%, but then after that, the county gets 60%, and the cities and towns get 40%, and that 40% is shared proportionally among the cities and towns by population. So for Oak Harbor, and this is of course based on 2020 figures, 2021, 2022 would be slightly different, but for Oak Harbor, that would raise about $500,000 if it was a 1/10 of a cent, about $1 million for 2/10 of a cent, and a little under $1.5 million for a 3/10 of a cent sales tax that was adopted by county voters. And there would be a majority vote requirement. It would have to be on a primary or a general election. So to recap, a levied lid lift property tax That's ideal for ongoing operational costs. An excess levy, property tax, would be ideal for debt service for long-term general obligation debt. And the public safety sales tax would be ideal for partially funding ongoing expenses. But the funding from the public safety sales tax would be insufficient to fund all the items that both Kevin and Ray went over earlier. So we put some options together for the city council to consider, and this is by no means an exhaustive list of combinations and ideas, but we had 3 options for the council to take a look at. Option 1 would be having a levied lid lift for ongoing operational costs, and an excess levy for the fire station, and also for the quit ladder truck, which would go with that new fire station. And if the voters did approve this, the construction process would be able to start in 2023. Option 2 would just be a levied lid lift for police operational costs, but also to save for the fire needs that Fire Chief went over on his slides. Because there's no excess levy, what would happen is that about $1.5 million would be put away for about 4 years until it builds up to about $6 million. And then you can do pay-as-you-go construction starting in 2027. But we're not really sure what construction costs are going to be in the future. We just ended up using the same cost for ease of calculation. A 5th year of savings might need to be put away, and depending on construction costs, and it might delay to 2028 for all we know. And option 3 would be the public safety sales tax. So the 2 charts that were shown during the chief's presentations are here. What we did, just for ease of calculation, was to use a 6-year average for the costs for the purposes of calculating excess levy and levy lid lift items. You can see the employee payroll for the 2 lieutenants and the 2 firefighters and the 8 paid on call firefighters. This number might, these numbers are all subject to change, but this number might be a little bit of an overestimate. We're taking a closer look at that. This is just startup costs. We split it over 6 years. Operating expenses that go with all the costs to operate the fire station and repair and replacement for vehicles and equipment and so on. This would be that should be I, not a J. So quit and engine payments. This would be just the debt payments for the new ladder quint and for the replacement engine. And this would be the bond payments over 20 years for the fire station. For police, you have the employee payroll that Kevin talked about, the 2 police officers and the 1 evidence tech, I believe, the 1-time equipment, the expansion remodel, and this is, of course, split over 6 years, so we have an average. Operating expenses, fleet replacements and reserve replacements, and the jail reorganization. So the total is within a couple $1,000s of each other as well, just coincidentally. Next slide. So this is a very busy slide. But just to go over the key points on the slide, the 2021 Oak Harbor assessed value is $2.35 billion. And that is the number that the amount of revenues from property taxes is derived from. That number is multiplied by the levy, which the current levy is 1.9259 and extra numbers. And then when you multiply those together, you get an estimated levy of about $4.5 million. At the statutory limit, it would be bringing in $7.5 million at this levy rate, which is the statutory limit. So the difference between the 2 is about $2.9 million. So the current amount of the property tax bill for the average house, and I believe when I looked at the data, the average assessed value was about $300,000 for the average house in Oak Harbor. Now the tax bill is comprised of paying the school board and paying the county, and there's a lot of different districts on there, but also the city of Oak Harbor is a relatively small portion compared to the entire tax bill. Currently, on the average house, based on that assessed value, the cost is about $577, which is about per year, or $48 a month. Going through the amount of levied lid lifts that would be needed for the fire ops, police ops, and the fire replacement engine, that would be about 1.17. And for the excess levy, for the bond for the station and the loan for the new quint, that would be about 0.21. So if you take this amount, the current levy, and this anticipated levy lid lift, you get this levy, and multiplied by the assessed value, you would get this much funding in total, including the 4.5 we currently get. This would be in addition to that. And the cost for the average homeowner would go from $577 to $911 per year, and the difference per month is 48 to about 76, or about 48, 58, 68, 70, about $28 a month. Now the excess levy is on top of that. That's about $516 it would raise, and here you go. You'd have that'd be about $66 or $5.50 per month for the station and the the apparatus that goes with the station. So option 2, everything would be under a levied lid lift. These numbers are the same. Now, when we add up all the items and put it under a levied lid lift, we have a problem. Because if you take this amount and you add it to the current estimated levy, you exceed the statutory limit by 0.0872, or if you use those average calculations, by about $205,000. Now that's based on the assessed value now. Next year, the assessed value is going to change. And depending on how it changes, this number, which has been decreasing every year, might decrease by this amount or more, which would no longer be an issue as far as doing this method. But as of right now, this method would exceed the amount of capacity that's available under the statutory limit. And just to go over these costs again, that doesn't change. The total levy lid lift needed would be about $400 annually for the average homeowner, or $34 per month. And when you add those together, it's about $81.50 per month, or almost $1,000 per year on the tax bill. Option 3 is the sales tax. The funding ranges from $450,000 to $1.5 million per year, which is insufficient to fund all the items. I did some calculations here about how things split out. If the city of Oak Harbor voters voted for a 1/10 of a penny on the sales tax, that would bring in about $450,000 for Oak Harbor. Island County would get some, the state would get some, and there's the total. If the county voters decided to vote for a 1/10 of a penny, Oak Harbor would get slightly more. It's a much larger tax base, but the split's all different. Like we would get about 85% of this split if the city of Oak Harbor voters voted for it, but we'd only get 35% of the entire county split. But because the county has a much larger tax base, it ends up being higher. So that's how we came up with the numbers to derive the amount that would be generated if the county voters voted for a 1/10 of a penny. Next slide is 2/10, and the final slide is 3/10. All 3 slides are insufficient to fund the proposals that were talked about earlier. So timing. So the experience from other cities shows that ensuring a sufficient time for outreach, education, and feedback is essential. So due to this, staff suggests that the 2022 general election be tentatively scheduled for the ballot measures, or whatever the city council ends up directing staff to do as a result of this and other meetings we will have. Just to go over, the single-year levy lift can go on any election. The excess levy can go on any election, whereas the multi-year levy lid lift and the public safety sales tax can only go on the primary and general. And this is from the MRC manual. There's filing deadlines for each one of these ballot deadlines. The first 2 have passed already, and these are the deadlines coming up for other ballot election dates, and you can see the election dates right here. So outreach, I'd like to provide Sandra, sorry, not Sandra, I'm tired, I just talked a lot. Sabrina, an opportunity to talk about outreach, potential outreach methodologies that we can do in order to get input from the public regarding this proposal.
Thank you, David. So simply put, based on looking at other cities and what they've done to be successful in this, it's using the tools that we already have, as well as increasing our education to the public about what this is that we're offering, why we need the funding, where the funding would be utilized, and giving them that information. So we would just up our engagement, also make sure that the voter's manual had really clear information for people so that when they were reviewing that, they knew exactly what they were supporting. So that's really the goal of this, is just to make sure that we're communicating and connecting with the community about why they want to support this.
Thank you. And with that, we are open for any questions that the city council may have.
Okay, council, are there questions or comments about this right now? Councilman Servadius, please.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tempore. This is without a doubt probably one of the most information-laden workshops we've had in a while. This is a lot to digest. A couple of quick questions, or I guess a comment and then a question. So obviously we're kind of going from 0 to 60, it seems like, and that's not necessarily a bad thing in getting two of our big public safety departments upgraded here, up to speed on some of their needs. I always support, just like we did with the going out, the Transportation Benefit District going out to the public. So whether it's the levy lid lift or the excess levy, that gives the voters a chance to decide what they want to prioritize. It's a fairly big jump based on some of those numbers, I think, for some of those folks. But just like the TBD, they may say that this is something that's a priority for the citizens, and they'll support it. So that's my thought there, is probably go out, specifically the excess levy. I'm sorry, levy lid lift was the first one, correct? Levy lid lift. The other one, the public safety sales tax, David, I'm not used to hearing terms. It's always a percent, so much of a percent. And you said, though, in this case, the city can do up to 1/10 of a cent. What is that per? How is that? You gave a slide up there of somebody's
0.1%, yes. So it's 1/10 of a penny is the same as 1/10 of a cent. And I did give, I should have gone over this rule a little bit better. So I wanted to use something that people might understand when they think of that, because 1/10 of a cent or 0.1% is kind of an amorphous number. It's not really a solid number for most folks. So I said, well, if somebody made a $100 purchase, what does this mean? Like, well, how much would it cost them? So in a $100 purchase, what we're talking about for this particular sales tax is basically 10 cents. So if they bought something for $100, they're paying 10 cents of that $100. Well, 10 cents on top of the $100 would go towards this public safety sales tax. And out of that amount, Oak Harbor would get 8.4 cents. The county would get 1.5 cents, and the state would get their share, which is minuscule.
So is the tax then 1/10 of 1%?
Yes.
So 1/10 of 1% is what the city could assess. And what if we pursued that option? I know you said that it's not enough to do everything we wanted to do. What if we pursue that, and in the county, you said they could go up to 0.3 of 1%?
Correct.
What if they don't approve that? I mean, they have to approve that completely separate from what the city does?
Yes, it's two separate votes. And there are scenarios on the MRSA guidelines I was using to come up with these calculations where, we talked about the share. If a city approves this, the city gets the bulk of it, 85%, but only from their own tax base. Whereas if a county approves it, cities all get 40% of the entire county's tax base, and that's divvied up by population. So if a county and city both approve separate taxes, first of all, together they cannot exceed 0.3. And second, the calculations get very complicated. Very complicated. If the city goes 0.1 and the county goes 0.2 or 0.1, it just gets extremely complicated. It would just, it would,
But
it would be,
it's 0.01 and 0.03%.
yes, yes.
Okay, let's keep that. I've never heard anybody talk in cents. It's
Okay.
of maybe there is, but I'm just not familiar with that. So just, if we're going to go out to the public, they're used to, if they've ever looked at their property tax bill, it's it's per thousand, but it's a percent. So
Okay.
this, we're talking about 1/10, so 0.01, and then the county can do an additional 0.03, but we can't get 0.04. We can only get 0.03.
Together?
0.3%.
Correct. So you cannot exceed 0.3%, or sorry, God, it's so hard. You cannot exceed 0.3% together.
0.03. It's
0.03, yes.
big difference. Okay. Yeah, it's a lot of difference. So, okay. So once again, I'll just come back, and we pursued something similar to this, obviously, for the TBD, and, folks supported it. And at that point, it's easy to break it out and say, hey, if we went from 8.7% to 8.9 as far as sales tax, people can see if they spend $100. And I think we did some educational pieces like that. Like I said, I'll pause here and see if my peers have anything. These are two departments we obviously need to continue to make sure they're supported. But this is a fairly, I think, big jump for folks to swallow, but they may absolutely support it, and that would be a good thing. So, all right, I'll pause at this point. Thank you.
Okay, the only hand I see raised right now is Mr. Oborn's hand. Mr.
Yeah, just to
Oborn?
kind of follow up here, David's doing a good job, but just to kind of, you're right on the lingo here. We use the 2/10. So this is half of what we did for the TBD. The TBD was 0.2%. This would be 1/10%. One of the unique things with this sales tax is the vehicles are exempt from it. So our dealership would not be affected by it. So that's another interesting thing with the 1/10 of the city or the 3/10 of the county exempts the vehicles. And that's one of the confusion we ran into. Mount Vernon has this, and one of the dealership here in town was talking about that. We couldn't understand. It didn't apply to the TBD, but it does apply with that exemption for those large purchases for the sales taxes, safety sales tax. So it's a unique kind of thing. And that's all I had, Mayor Pro Tempore.
Thank you, Mr. Oborn. Mr. Wiesner, your hand is raised, please.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Well, yes, I'll have to agree with Councilmember Servatius. This is like 0 to 60 really quick. Not so much for the fire department. So I guess I need to preface that, Chief Dresker, you have my undying support, but your presentation, that's kind of a 0 to 60 for us. Fire department, yeah, we've been talking about this for 15 years, and obviously time's getting closer, and Chief Merrill's right. We've got a bunch of new houses going in, and we keep stretching that southwest corner of town. It'd sure be great if we could get together with the county and get some JPA stuff going on so that we can, truly understand, what potential we have in that southwest section of town. That would, I think, be an important ingredient in understanding that next station's location. And so, I'm certainly in favor of continuing the discussion regarding the fire department. When it comes to the police department, I think we need to sit down, and I want to have a little more discussion about it. That's a couple of things I don't know that I was prepared for in there. One is shifting. It looks like we're shifting our annual maintenance cost or annual equipment acquisition cost over into a new ongoing budget, which is, I guess, we're freeing that money up for elsewhere within the department. And I'm not looking necessarily to dive in that today, but I guess what I'm saying is I think a little more conversation needs to be happening on the police department end and on the fire department end. I think we've been having this conversation long enough. We've been having the conversation for 15 years. It's probably time that we start taking some definite action on the plan to start beefing up that fire department a little bit and getting prepared for that second station. Thank you.
Hey, do you mind if I respond to something on that, Councilman, just real quick?
No, sir, please go ahead.
Okay, just to be clear on several of my requests, I would not anticipate you'd be freeing that money up for the police department. That would be money that you would reallocate into city budget somewhere for city expenses with growth, if you understand what I'm saying, on several of those things. I would not expect to maintain that same budget level if those items were placed into this budgetary item. It would just, that some of them, one-time cost, some of that stuff, but some of those things definitely, I would anticipate that money would not remain in my budget.
Thank you, Chief. Council members, any other questions at this time? I have a couple, I guess, comments for David Goldman. On the TBD, we got extremely lucky. And basically, we had a summer, I think we decided in July, to go for it that November. And it counted on everybody talking about it. Staff kind of was like, well, we can't tell people, well, we can educate. Council members did it at their different activities they involved to. But 2022 would be great, but I just don't think we can make it. You can't, it's hard to educate when you can't see someone across the table or across the room. Yes, we're getting better at virtual, but we really need better Wi-Fi, we need better cell, and we need fiber. I mean, our schools, the kids are, I'm sorry, if you have to go sit in front of a bus in a parking lot to try to be able to do your homework, and until things open up, I'm sorry, that just seems like a pie in the eye. I can be proved wrong and go ahead and do it. But the other thing is Mr. Merriman, a finance director, went to bat and figured out the mean average income for Island County compared to the state. And that was many years ago. The state was at like 52,000, and our residents in Island County were only at 30, maybe 31. And so there's a big disparity of who lives and works in our county and our city. And if you look around town, everybody's trying to hire people. They're closing restaurants, they're closing businesses on Mondays and Tuesdays, or maybe it's Tuesdays and Wednesdays. But until some of that clears up, I'm not saying there isn't a need. We're not quite at catastrophe level with the fire department and the police, but on the fire, sometimes we get pretty close to it. So the timing is critical, and how we are able to educate. There's still an awful lot of people in this population that is older. The Navy keeps us younger, that they're not going to all go online. They don't all look at Facebook. They don't. Channel 10 is a big help. But the timing of it, and I think we need to have several workshops just on this subject with the council there and the department heads on how this could work. Is there a compromise? If it's needed by 2022, but I mean, that's just barely a year away for that election. I mean, my council members may not agree with me, but you want to get it right and you want to get it approved. You don't want to have to keep going and going. I know there's a school levy in 2022 coming up. I don't know if it's February or April, but it's in the spring, I believe, sometime. I could be wrong on that. And you don't want two of these going on at the same time. So this is great. I'm glad it's been brought to the forefront, but I think we've got to step back from that 60 miles an hour and go back to maybe 40 and catch our breath. But the timing is critical. And we do not live in a really rich community compared to Bellevue or, I mean, just some of the others. It's just not there.
Yeah.
And you may even want to figure out what the mean average income is for our county. That's got to be a consideration. And we still don't know, with all the businesses trying to hire, how many may still end up closing down. I usually find that out at Help House when the numbers jump by 50 or 100 people that someone has closed down here in town. So this is great. I appreciate all the work you've done, but it's like you said, we just got dumped on, which is good, and you've got to start the conversation somewhere. So I really appreciate that. But if we have to have 3 workshops in a month, then we're just going to have to buckle down and do it in order to vet this and figure out where we're all on the same team. So that's just my ending comment. But thank you very much. Thank you to both chiefs. Great presentations, and I'm glad that we had the slides beforehand too. That really helped.
Yeah, I definitely appreciate your comments. Yeah, that's exactly what we were thinking, that this would be a bit of a process, and we needed to broach the subject with the city council on this. We actually were going to do it a little bit earlier in the year, but a lot of things came up, and this was the date where we ended up, starting to broach the process. As far as those median numbers go, I had to actually do that research for the American Rescue Plan Act funding, because one of the buckets dealt with supplemental pay, and there were some limitations on who can, how much you can pay and who can get the pay. And I had to look at the median income of the county compared to the state of Washington. So I do have that information I'll be able to send out to the city council. In addition, what else did I want to add? I lost it, just on the tip of my mind. But anyway, thank you for your input. And yeah, definitely, we will be coming back for further workshops. The question came up about, police needs. I think maybe that should be where we start. Just talk about police needs in detail, so we have a better understanding of that. And yeah, I guess we can take it from there. Oh, I was going to say, I went through a bit of a process for levied lid lift over at the city of Kirkland. It took about a year. They had some ideas up front, but they put together a group comprised of community members, business community, and folks out in the community, and also some council members were on that committee as well. And they provided, a forum for folks to provide input to the committee and to city staff, so they understood where the community was and what the community needs were. And that did end up changing substantially what they ended up going for in their levy. And I know that Sabrina had worked at the city of Bothell during the time where they did a combination excess levy and levied lid lift for fire stations as well. So we do have some experience on staff regarding these kind of items, which is one of the thoughts of, tentatively scheduling it for November of 2022. We actually thought when we presented this today that the city council might say, "We'll do it as soon as possible. Put it on February," and blah blah. So yeah, it is good to hear from the council that we should have an educational process and reach out to the community and folks out there to figure out really educate them as to our current level of service and hear from them what they expect the level of service to be ideally, and of course provide them how much that might cost and impact them to get there. So yes, thank you very much.
That's good to know, which staff members. With the marina and the dredging and stuff, they have tried 3 times to become a port district, and it was soundly defeated. So if you can put that feather in your hat to also remember. So it would be nice to put it on in February, but I don't think we're quite there yet, and I want to be sure that when we put it on, we win, that this is a win-win for everybody. So.
Absolutely.
Any other questions from council?
Hey, Beth, can you hear me? It's Erica.
Yes, please.
Oh, hey. So I just wanted to remind you, I'm driving. My husband's helping me unmute here. That the school district is planning on running a bond as well in 2022. I didn't know if staff knew that, but I just wanted to throw that out there. And Connor Laffey at the school district is a great resource that probably can help with all of the details and the dates for that. But I just thought I wanted that to be in staff's mind as well, that the school district is planning on a bond for several projects. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Wessinger, very much. All right, the next subject is Legal Department, ordinance number 1934. And I believe our attorney, Grant Weed, is presenting this today.
Yes, I am. Good afternoon, Mayor Pro Tem Munns and Council. Given the hour, I am going to keep my presentation extremely brief. And besides, I don't have a PowerPoint with burning buildings and such. So keeping their attention it will be more difficult. This topic involves draft ordinance 1934. Having to do with donations of money, land, or personal property to the city. As you may very well be aware, cities fairly frequently get contacted by persons wanting to make donations. State law in general authorizes cities to accept money and property donations, but it doesn't really provide any specifics as to how or what the process should be. Many cities do adopt more specific provisions. So there's internal control and audit accountability, as well as improvement of process and consistency. So that's the purpose of the draft ordinance. Oak Harbor has not previously had such an ordinance on the books. Just to highlight, summarize ordinance 1934, section 1 provides for the purpose, which is basically to adopt a process for acceptance of donations. Section 2 relates to unrestricted donations, which would allow the mayor, the finance director, or their designee to accept donations of up to $1,000. For anything above $1,000, it would require higher scrutiny and city council review and action by ordinance. In unrestricted gifts, the city can specify what the purpose is going to be for the use of the donation, and if it opts not to, donation would be dedicated to the general fund. Section 3 of the ordinance relates to restricted donations, where the donor does have a specific use in mind. The same dollar thresholds would apply. The $1,000 threshold would allow for acceptance by the mayor, finance director, or their designee. And the restricted donations would allow the city to honor the desired use and credit the value to the appropriate fund, such as, for example, police or parks, or what the donor intends. Section 4 of the ordinance just makes it clear that donations or dedications of real property that are a result of development activity, like donation of right-of-way or parks, are exempt from this ordinance and not required to be accepted because they're managed separately through the land use development process. The one issue that you may want to consider is what is the appropriate threshold for the value that the administration can accept versus the council. I think our parks director had some input on perhaps having a higher dollar threshold than $1,000 because, for example, I understand the donation to erect a park bench in memory of someone can run certainly higher than $1,000. So it's kind of a question of, at what level does the council want to be involved in acceptance of such gifts? So that ends my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Weed. Any council members have any questions at this time? I'm not seeing anything, so you might have a few when this is brought up at the next council meeting, but thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. We'll bring this forward to council for further consideration.
All right, we're going on to Public Works, Windjammer Park Rotary Bridge report from our Parks Department, please.
Good afternoon, Mayor Pro Tem and City Council. This is a response to the request to better elaborate on the budget overage for the construction of the Rotary Bridge. Amy, if you could go ahead. So in April 7th of 2020, City Council passed a resolution 20-13 to provide funds for the sleeper pit funds, which are earmarked for park expenditures for the bridge project. During our initial meetings for the 21-22 budget discussion, the former city engineer requested that they would need an additional $30,000 to fund the project. So that brought the revised project budget up to $70,000. So the 21-22 biennial budget includes the addition of that $30,000 for in-house construction costs to replace the existing lagoon bridge at Windjammer. And as you can see in our budget forms, that $30,000 was there. Amy. There was an in-kind donation from the Rotary Club of $40,000. They covered $10,000 of the kit, and they covered the cost of the kit, and $10,000 of the $13,000 necessary to replace the bridge planks. So the total estimated design contract for the project was authorized at $52.9 for design. Funds available at the time was $40,000. Design costs to date are $48,116 and change. At the time we did this presentation, we were still waiting on one more invoice, but we're fairly confident that it'll be under that 52 number. The total estimated in-house construction cost for the project was $30,000 authorized by the city during the biennial budget process. The in-house construction costs to date are $32,301 and change. Amy? The unknown in-house construction costs that took us above budget were the following. We had to replace the wooden beams versus reusing the existing. When we pulled the bridge apart, they were found to be unusable, and so we had to replace them for $13,000. The replacement of the bridge planks versus the wooden beams. Originally, the 2 wooden beams or 4 wooden beams that we were going to use, when we pulled off the planks, they were rotten beyond serviceability for the next 30 years, so they needed to be replaced. The bridge planks that sit on the beams were also beyond repair. We could not use them on the new kit, so it was necessary to replace them with new marine grade pressure treated planks. We had to use marine grade materials which are substantially greater in cost than standard materials. Amy? Well, go back one if you don't mind. Another issue I want to bring to your attention is when this bridge was built back in the late 60s, they built to the site conditions. So what happened is they had the abutments that are either in the big concrete squares that hold up the bridge itself were built kind of cattywampus, but for the site conditions at the time, they were square. The pillars in the middle of the bridge that the beams sit on were built square to the bridge at the time, but not square for what we were doing. And so we had to do a lot of modifications to the air quotes kit just to get things square. And so that took a lot of additional materials and it really slowed down the process. Go ahead, Amy, that next one, please. There are a few outstanding expenditures, therefore, staff has requested a budget amendment to be done in the amount of $15,000. The total project budget, including the budget amendment, is now $85,000. The total project expenditures to date are $418 and 10 cents. And I'm available for questions.
Council, are there any questions? Mr. Crawford, that last slide, not the question one, but before that, you're asking for another 15,000, but you said the cost so far is at 80,000. If you add 15, that would make 95. I don't understand.
David Goldman here. It was already approved by the council at the last budget amendment. So it was 70 and an additional 15 was added to make a total of 85.
And the issue we had was that when it was requested that we give you a better reconciliation, that we hadn't gotten all the final bills in. So we really wanted to come in one time for that additional 15 that Mr. Goldman already spoke of, and we're fairly confident that there'll be $5,000 less spent than what the council had allocated for that.
Okay, now seems more clear to me. Thank you. And let's hope that it doesn't go over that extra 5,000. Thank you very much, Mr. Crawford. That was very good. I still don't see other extra hands. So I guess we go to the city administrator's report. Mr. Oburn.
All right, long, comprehensive meeting here, a lot of great presentations. So part of my report covers development and development services, and our development services director covered a lot of those pages and gave you kind of a recap of a major part of my report. I appreciate that. And in order to produce a more concise report, some content has been removed or condensed. So this is more of a condensed version from the past input. I'm here to take any input from the council or questions.
Thank you, Mr. Oburn. Any questions from council? Mr. Wiesner, please.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Mr. Oborn, if you could, at an upcoming workshop or a meeting, if you could update the council on where we're at with the use of our biosolids. I noticed in your report, we developed 31.10 tons of biosolids in the month of July. And I'd be interested to know what our plans are moving forward with the distribution of that product in our marketing plan and with Would Be Green and et cetera.
Okay, we'll put that on our list, and we already committed to an update on the broadband specifically, and also on GIS, and then some quick report on Anacortes and their wet fiber, so.
Is that it, Mr. Wiesner?
Yep, that's
Thank
all I
you.
have.
Thank you very much. Anyone else from council? I have one quick question, Mr. O'Byrne. Now that we will have an interim public works director coming, what is the next plan that we're going to start advertising and hire a permanent one?
Yeah, the plan is probably to bring him on for around 3 months and then start the process like we've done before with the other director positions and involve the council, at least 2 to 3 council members on the selection committee. So that's the plan now. Things are a little fluid, so I don't always want to do dates, but certainly we recognize the mayor has the authority to appoint up to 6 months, and he's taking advantage of that, like we mentioned in the report. But certainly the full-time position has to be confirmed by the council, so it's always worked well when we've done that. We've included the council in the process, and the mayor and I intend to do that as we go through and recruit for the permanent position.
Okay, since it seems to be taking longer than usual time to get applicants, maybe before that 3-month period, if he's only supposed to be hired for 6 months, we may want to start in the end of month 1 or something to start advertising and getting that out and for applicants until the position is filled and not a deadline. But just a suggestion.
Good
I know
point.
you
Thank
keep track of that. All right, thank you. Any other questions from council? This is our time. I don't see anyone, and Mr. Wiesner's hand isn't up, and Mr. Servadius, so we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone, for your time, and staff, thank you for your presentations. I know it took a lot of time, and you've been sitting here as long as we have, so thank you very much. And